Hey, how's it going everybody, and welcome back to Which Game is Better. If you are unfamiliar with this series, basically what I do is take two games from the same genre and compare them on 4 different categories, which is story, gameplay, open world, and presentation. For this video, I will be doing things a bit differently, and we are going to compare the games on a much closer scale. On screen is what I will be judging both games on, and whichever game I feel does better in said category, I will reward a point. At the end of the video, we will have a final score, and that is how we will determine which game is better. So without further ado, Far Cry 4 versus Far Cry 5. Our first category is story, and let's start with the protagonist. In Far Cry 4, we have Ajay Ghale, the son of a family of Kirati freedom fighters, while in Far Cry 5, we have the deputy, a rookie officer. Honestly, both games have bad protagonists. Ajay Ghale is very boring and doesn't have anything unique about him. His personality is the equivalent to that of a whiteboard, and he never gets a chance to display any defining traits or characteristics. However, in Far Cry 5, the deputy is a literal whiteboard. The deputy is a completely blank slate that you can customize to your liking, and he is completely mute throughout the whole story, which makes absolutely no sense, and obviously a character who never talks can't really have any personality or charm or anything essential in any good character ever. So while Ajay Ghale sucks, he doesn't suck as much as the deputy, who is hardly a character at all in my opinion. First point goes to Far Cry 4. The biggest bright spots in both games' stories are the game's villains. Joseph Seed for Far Cry 5 is a very creepy, spoken villain. He is very articulate and persuasive and makes you think a lot that maybe he is the good guy and not the villain. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 4, we have the classy, charismatic villain of Pagan Min. Pagan is a borderline psychopath who just loves the conflict and wants to watch the world burn, and his only flaw is that we didn't see enough of him. The advantage of Pagan though is that he has a personal connection to the main protagonist Ajay Ghale, and it humanizes Pagan a lot more and makes him more interesting, giving him a deeper level, while Joseph Seed has no correlation to the deputy whatsoever, and he just wants to either kill the deputy or persuade him. So the better villain of the two is Pagan Min. The plot is the last thing we are going to talk about for the stories. In Far Cry 4, Ajay Ghale goes to the country of Kyrat, located in the Himalayan mountains, to deliver his mother's ashes as her final request, when he is then swept up in the middle of a war between the royal army of Kyrat and a rebellion known as the Golden Path. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 5, Joseph Seed raises a religious cult who take over and claim the region of Hope County, Montana, trapping the innocent people in and torturing and brainwashing them to join the cult. I once again am going to give this point to Far Cry 4. To me, the plot felt a lot more focused and emotionally driven, as Ajay desperately tries to make his family proud and deliver on his mother's final request. Far Cry 5's plot just feels a lot more scattered, and with no protagonist to back it up, the plot rests solely on the villains, who are often all over the place and force feed you exposition by kidnapping you randomly from the world. Moving on to gameplay, we have Far Cry 4 with 3 points thus far, and Far Cry 5 still with a big fat goose egg. The first thing I would like to talk about is gunplay. Now, both games are very similar in this regard, and there is not much to differentiate. With that said, Far Cry 5 has a slight edge here because it just straight up has more weapons, more gadgets, explosives, the inclusion of melee weapons, and more gun customization. Point Far Cry 5. There you go, Far Cry, you got one. It's a very similar deal with stealth. Both games are very similar stealth-wise. Far Cry 4 has double takedowns with the throwing knife and gun, which is not in Far Cry 5. However, Far Cry 5 does have the melee weapons you can use in stealth. Although, the takedown animations in Far Cry 4 with the knife are much better than the takedowns from Far Cry 5. Far Cry 4's takedowns are very brutal and satisfying, unlike in Far Cry 5 where you just clock someone over the head with a melee weapon. The stealth column goes to Far Cry 4. Driving is a big part of Far Cry games, and it is a lot of fun in both games. Both are once again very similar. Driving in Far Cry 5 is a little easier because the world is a lot more flat, unlike in Far Cry 4 where you will find yourself driving up a lot of hills and steep terrain. Far Cry 5 also has a lot more vehicle options, and you can actually purchase, spawn, and customize your own vehicles, while you can't do any of that in Far Cry 4. So vehicles go to Far Cry 5. The last thing in gameplay I want to talk about is customization. Customization in the Far Cry series is something that has gotten better and more expansive in each game. In Far Cry 4, the only thing you can customize are your weapons. You can choose between a few weapon skins, scopes, and barrels. In Far Cry 5, you can customize not only your weapons, but your character and his or her clothing, along with vehicle customization where you can add your own upgrades and skins. The gun customization in Far Cry 5 is still pretty basic, just like Far Cry 4, but there are far more options for weapon skins and attachments, allowing each weapon to be more suited to your liking, so the clear-cut winner for customization is Far Cry 5. Far Cry 4 remains in the lead 4-3 heading into the open world category, and the first thing I would like to talk about is the location of the two games. Far Cry 4 takes place in the fantasy country of Kyrat, located in the Himalayan mountains, while Far Cry 5 takes place in the made-up Hope County, Montana. This one is rather obvious and there is not much explanation needed. Kyrat is a beautiful site with breathtaking views, snowy mountains in the backdrop, and lush green hills. The world looks and feels incredible, and the choice to have Far Cry 4 in a place as unique as the Himalayan mountains was an excellent decision and is the reason Far Cry 4 is such a great game. Meanwhile, in Far Cry 5, we have Hope County, Montana. Yay, Montana! It's still pretty, don't get me wrong, but it is extremely boring, especially when put up against the Himalayan mountains. The world mostly consists of farmland and forests, with a very flat and uninteresting terrain. I could go on, but we all know that the Himalayan mountains of Far Cry 4 blow Far Cry 5 out of the water on this one. But I'm sorry if any of you live in Montana, by the way, it's nothing personal. The next thing I want to do is compare the side missions and side tasks of both games. In Far Cry 5, there are quite a few side story threads that all have pretty good mission variety and usually entail doing a few things and shooting a few things. The side missions are also quite vital to progressing the main story. While in Far Cry 4, there are a large amount of side quests that are basically mini games. The side quests in Far Cry 4 are very repetitive and can become pretty boring after doing them for a while, and there isn't any story attached to them. However, there are still a lot of fun moments to be had with these side quests, and Far Cry 4 also has more outposts and something called fortresses, which is absent in Far Cry 5. The outposts in Far Cry 4 were more fun for me to play. I found myself being more tactical and using the environment more often, while in Far Cry 5 it felt very easy and made outposts feel more like a distraction rather than a fun side task. The fortresses were also one of my favorite parts about Far Cry 4, as they were outposts times 100 in scale. Sieging and infiltrating these large forts and fending off helicopters and armies of enemies was a ton of fun. There was nothing really like that in Far Cry 5 other than the bunkers, which often forced open combat and were more linear focused, while in fortresses you were free to tackle it however you wanted. It's also worth mentioning that Far Cry 4 does just straight up have more side content than Far Cry 5 in general, so the side mission point goes to Far Cry 4. The last thing in the open world column is the immersion / life of both open worlds. Hope County, Montana really struggles here. The world is very large, and because of its size, there is a lot of empty space that has nothing to do or see. The amount of wild and exotic animals is bare in comparison to Far Cry 4, and there wasn't anything really making me want to go out and explore the open world as opposed to just completing missions. Far Cry 4 does a much better job in this regard. Kyrat is full of life. Just driving around you will run into exotic animals like rhinos and elephants, or you will come across a skirmish between the Royal Army and Golden Path, or even a group of civilians being attacked by wild animals. Far Cry 4's big, breathtaking world makes it a lot more encouraging to explore and immerse yourself in its world. Even the small things like bell towers and the car radios help you forget everything in the real world, which is why Far Cry 4 without a doubt deserves this point. The Far Cry series has always been known for its great graphics. Now in terms of graphics, Far Cry 4 is automatically at a disadvantage here since it released 4 years before Far Cry 5. But Far Cry 4 still has some exceptional graphics even by today's standards. Personally, I like the look of Far Cry 4 more as well, but obviously just from a side-by-side comparison, you can tell that Far Cry 5 is the better looking game. Everything is just more sharp and detailed, so graphics go to Far Cry 5. Now on the flip side, we have performance. Performance, I'm considering everything like FPS, glitches, crashes, etc. Side by side, Far Cry 4 runs smoother and has more FPS than Far Cry 5, which is expected since the game is older. In terms of glitches, both games were pretty good. I never had any game-breaking bugs with either game, although I did have a lot more small little bugs with Far Cry 5, things like texture pop-ins or glitched out NPCs not following or repeating the same thing over and over. Nothing too serious, and I had a few crashes with Far Cry 5 and had none with Far Cry 4. that could also just be a convenience. Overall though, Far Cry 4 does run smoother and is more polished in terms of bugs and glitches, so performance goes to Far Cry 4. Now, surprisingly, the toughest decision for this video I had to make was deciding which game had a better soundtrack. Far Cry 5 has that really catchy, religious music that easily gets stuck in your head, and Far Cry 4 has some really good songs that flow nicely with the background, especially the music at the end. That choice was perfect. Obviously, music is different for everybody, and I think most of us can agree that both games have really good soundtracks, but I just found Far Cry 5 had a lot more songs that got stuck in my head, and I actually listened to after I finished the game, so this point could really go either way, but I personally choose Far Cry 5.
Some cannot tell wrong from right. Jacob's gonna come and set those sinners free.
Some of these scorings were tough decisions, but ultimately the overall winner for me was obvious, and that is Far Cry 4 by a score of 8 to 5. I found Far Cry 4 to be overall a much more enjoyable experience opposed to Far Cry 5, and in my opinion it is in fact the better game. Obviously at the end of the day this is all my opinion, and you should feel free to share what game you think is better down in the comments. Also feel free to let me know what you want to see next for which game is better. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We are getting ever so close to 5,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate that. If you want to play Far Cry 4 or Far Cry 5 with me and others, please feel free to join my Discord server. The link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching everybody, and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.